let's go back to that fuel control switch if we can. Yeah, and let's stay over there. And let me go across to the big screen to try and explain to our viewers what exactly is happening over here. This becomes absolutely clear so that our viewers know what I'm talking about. So we're going to be staying with these images for a moment, and I'm going to just explain, and if we can just freeze these images for a moment and stay with these. These are the fuel control switches. These are the throttles of the Boeing 787, and this is what it was. This is what the debris actually of the aircraft indicated. It's burnt out. Those are the throttles on the top, and over here you can see the fuel control switches in the on position. Now, if this appears to be slightly unclear, let me come over here and talk a little bit about the fuel control switches, because this is important. These are not normal switches that you just sort of push up and down. The switches, in fact, you have to lift up like this and then bring it down, right? So if we can freeze the image for a moment, you have to lift it up and then bring it down. So it's a deliberate effort. It's not something that you push from top like a normal switch or a light switch, as it were. The position in the top is when it's on. The position at the bottom is when it is cut off. So if there was a cut off of the fuel switches shortly after the aircraft took off, then the question is, how within a span of a second or why in a span of approximately a second did one of the pilots potentially lift these switches and take it down to the off position, right? Now that's only one part of it, because the moment that started happening, thrust to the engines started reversing. And what we can actually do is also then tell you the following sequence of events. And what happened thereafter is that there was a rapid de-throttling which took place. The thrust of the engines started coming down, right? But very, very importantly, there was, according to the data, an effort by the pilots to toggle these switches. So they tried to put the switches back on, and they were successful in doing that. Once they were able to do that, one of the two engines, remember at this stage we are in a dual engine failure, right? Both the engines have stopped functioning. Once they did put that back up, one of the two engines of the aircraft did relight. In other words, it did restart. It did start developing thrust, right? The throttle was, the thrust was rising in that engine. That may not have been the case in the other engine, which did relight, but perhaps that wasn't thrusting quite as much. Now, if we look at this debris over here, from the debris, it's that same lever and it's the same switches. As you can see, it's in the on position. So despite it having been switched off, it's clear that somebody put it back on. That's what the digital flight data recorder also indicates. It also indicates that the aircraft did start thrusting, but the real pity and the tragedy is that the aircraft was very low at that stage. Both engines had flamed out or potentially flamed out because, in other words, they weren't developing thrust because the fuel switches had been put off. The pilots, or one of them, put the fuel switch back on. One of the engines reignited, but by then, with no altitude to play with, the aircraft started going down and it crashed. So everything that I've described over here points to the fuel switches. Now, why exactly did that take place? And what we will need to ask is there any scenario in which these fuel switches could be not part of the problem? I mean, could fuel be cut off from the engines even with these switches being in the on position? Could there be an electrical failure or a mechanical failure as a result of which, quite independent from the switches themselves, fuel flow to the engines was stopped? There is no answer to that, and that's something that we need to ask experts.